What happens when a beloved television icon sits down for what should be a simple chat on a daytime talk show, only to face a barrage of disrespectful questions that cross every line imaginable? In just 39 seconds, a single comment from the host would turn a friendly interview into the most explosive moment in Loose Women history, ending with the guest storming off set in front of millions of viewers. The morning had started like any other at the Loose Women studios. Crew members rushed around making final preparations. Cameras were positioned. Lighting was checked. The audience filed in, excited to see the day's guest. When David Jason's name was announced, there was an immediate wave of enthusiasm. This was someone everyone knew, someone everyone loved. David Jason walked onto the set with that familiar smile. The legendary actor, known and loved for decades of brilliant performances, waved to the studio audience as they erupted in applause. He was there to talk about his latest project, maybe share a few stories from his incredible career, nothing more. It was supposed to be light, easy, fun, just another day promoting his work on a friendly talk show. Denise Welch sat at the panel alongside the other hosts. Ruth Langsford smiled warmly from her seat, looking genuinely pleased to have David there. Nadia Sawalha beamed at him as he settled into the guest chair. The studio lights were bright and warm. The energy in the room felt good, normal, safe. Everything seemed perfectly set up for a pleasant conversation, but anyone watching Denise closely might have noticed something slightly off in her expression, a tightness around her mouth, a certain look in her eyes, a posture that suggested she was ready for something. This was not going to go the way everyone expected. Ruth started things off with a gentle question about his new book. "David, it is wonderful to have you here. Tell us about your latest book. What inspired you to write it?" David answered with his trademark charm, his eyes twinkling, as he launched into a funny anecdote about the writing process. He talked about struggling to remember certain details from his early career. He made a joke about his terrible handwriting. The audience laughed. It was exactly the kind of light, entertaining moment everyone had come for. "That sounds fascinating," Ruth said, still smiling, "and I know our viewers will love reading it." Nadia chimed in next, leaning forward with genuine interest. "David, and you have had such an incredible career. Thinking back to some of your most iconic roles, do you have a favorite? One that stands out above all the others?" David smiled and began talking about his memories from one of his classic shows. He described the cast, the crew, the long hours on set. He shared a touching story about a particular scene that had been difficult to film. His voice was warm and nostalgic. The audience hung on every word. This was television gold. Pure, simple, heartwarming conversation. Everything was going exactly as it should. The interview was flowing naturally. David was relaxed and engaging. The hosts were friendly and attentive. The audience was loving every minute. Then Denise leaned forward. The movement was deliberate, purposeful. Her expression had changed. The pleasant facade dropped away, replaced by something harder, more confrontational. "David, I want to ask you something," she said. Her tone had shifted completely. Gone was the friendly warmth. In its place was an edge, sharp, challenging. "You have been in this industry for what, 50 years? More? And in all that time, do you not think you have benefited from a system that favors men over women?" The audience went quiet. You could feel the energy in the room change instantly. It was like someone had turned off the warmth and turned on the air conditioning. Ruth glanced at Denise with a confused, almost worried look. Nadia shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her smile fading. This was not in the script. This was not what anyone had agreed to. David, to his credit, stayed remarkably calm. His smile dimmed slightly, but he maintained his composure. "I think I have worked very hard throughout my career," he said carefully, choosing his words with obvious thought. "I have always tried to treat everyone with respect and fairness. But do you acknowledge, Denise pressed, leaning even further forward, her voice growing louder, that women in your exact position would never have had the same opportunities? That you have essentially coasted on privilege your entire life? David blinked. His expression showed genuine surprise now. Coasted? I would not say I have coasted. I have spent my entire life working in this profession. I started from absolutely nothing, from the bottom. But you are a man, Denise shot back immediately, not giving him a chance to finish his thought. That fact alone gave you an advantage from day one. You cannot possibly deny that truth. Ruth tried to step in, clearly sensing that this was spiraling. Denise, I think what David is trying to say is that... No, Ruth. Let him answer, Denise interrupted sharply, holding up her hand to stop her co-host. I want to hear him say it. I want to hear him acknowledge his privilege. David took a slow, measured breath. You could see him trying desperately to stay composed, to remain professional, to not let the situation get to him. I respect your opinion, Denise. I truly do. But I do not think it is fair or accurate to reduce my entire career to my gender. I have worked incredibly hard. I have faced countless rejections. I have struggled through difficult times. Oh, please, Denise said, waving her hand dismissively in the air. Every single actor faces rejection. That is part of the job. But you still got more chances than any woman would have gotten. You got more opportunities, more second chances, more forgiveness when you failed. You know I am right. The tension was thick now. You could cut it with a knife. Nadia looked like she wanted to disappear completely, her face flushed with embarrassment. The audience sat in stunned silence. People glanced at each other with wide eyes. This was not the show they came to see. This was something else entirely. Something uncomfortable and wrong. I came here to talk about my book, David said quietly, his voice controlled, but with an unmistakable undercurrent of frustration. Not to be lectured about my gender. And there it is, Denise said, her voice rising with apparent triumph. You cannot handle being challenged, can you? You are so used to everyone kissing the ground you walk on. So used to being treated like royalty. The moment someone asks you a difficult question, you shut down. Denise, that is really not fair, Ruth said firmly, her own voice taking on an edge now. David is our guest. We invited him here. Fair? Denise turned to Ruth now, her attention shifting. What is not fair is that men like him have had every single door open for them, while women have had to fight tooth and nail for scraps. That is what is not fair. I have never stopped anyone from succeeding, David said, his voice still controlled, but clearly strained now. I have never stood in anyone's way. I have supported many, many people in this industry. Men and women both. Supporting people after you have already made it to the top is not the same as acknowledging your privilege, Denise countered immediately. You sit there in your comfortable position, with your successful career, with your accolades and your fame, and you want us all to pat you on the back and tell you how wonderful you are. Nadia finally found her voice, trying desperately to redirect. Maybe we should move on and talk about the book now. David, you mentioned in the introduction that you included some never-before-told stories. Can you tell us about... No, Denise said sharply, cutting Nadia off mid-sentence. I am not done with this conversation. This is important. David looked at her for a long moment. His expression was a mixture of disbelief and disappointment. What exactly do you want me to say, Denise? What words are you looking for? I want you to admit the truth, Denise said, her voice growing even louder. I want you to admit that you have had it easier than women, that your success is not just about your talent, that the system has protected you and promoted you and given you chances that women never got. I will not do that, David said, his voice finally showing real firmness. Because it is not true. It is simply not true. I am proud of what I have accomplished in my life. I am proud of the work I have done, and I will not apologize for working hard and earning my place in this industry. Denise actually laughed. It was not a warm laugh. It was cold, mocking. Earning your place. That is rich. That is absolutely rich. You were handed opportunities on a silver platter, and you know it. Denise, stop this right now, Ruth said, her tone much sharper than before. This is completely inappropriate. You are being disrespectful to our guest. Inappropriate? Denise whipped around to face Ruth, her voice incredulous. What is inappropriate is sitting here pretending that the industry has been fair and equal. What is inappropriate is acting like men have not had every possible advantage. What is inappropriate is refusing to have honest conversations about privilege and power. David stood up. The movement was sudden enough that everyone in the studio froze. The audience gasped slightly. Ruth's eyes went wide. Nadia's hand flew to her mouth. Even Denise stopped mid-breath. He looked at Denise for a long moment. Then he looked at Ruth. Then at Nadia. Then out at the confused and uncomfortable faces in the audience. The silence was deafening. I did not come here for this, he said. His voice was calm now, but there was no mistaking the emotion underneath. The hurt, the frustration, the disappointment. I came here to have a pleasant conversation, to share some stories from my career, to be respectful and kind. But I will not sit here and be attacked simply for being a man. Oh, here we go, Denise muttered, rolling her eyes dramatically. Playing the victim card. How predictable. I am not playing anything, David said, his voice rising slightly for the first time. I am simply stating a fact. And the fact is, I am leaving. David, please, you do not have to go, Ruth said, standing up quickly. Her face showed genuine distress. Please, sit back down. We can talk about the book. I think I do have to go, Ruth, David replied gently. I appreciate your kindness. Todd, but I cannot stay here. He started to remove his microphone, his hands moving carefully, deliberately. I have been in this business for a very long time, he continued, still working on the microphone clip. I have done thousands upon thousands of interviews. I have appeared on every kind of program you can imagine. And I have never, ever been treated like this. Not once. Denise crossed her arms defensively. Maybe you have just never been properly challenged before. Maybe everyone has been too afraid to ask you the hard questions. David stopped what he was doing and looked directly at her. Really looked at her. Challenged? He repeated slowly. There is a world of difference between challenging someone and being openly disrespectful to them. And you, Denise, have crossed that line. You have crossed it repeatedly. Nadia stood up as well, her chair scraping against the floor. David, I am so incredibly sorry. This is not what any of us wanted. This is not how we treat our guests. I know, Nadia, David said, his expression softening when he looked at her. You and Ruth have been absolutely lovely. Both of you. This is not your fault, but I still cannot stay. The audience sat in absolute silence now. Some people looked shocked, their mouths hanging open. Others looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. A few were shaking their heads in disbelief. This was not entertainment. This was a disaster unfolding in real time. Denise stood up as well, her movements sharp and aggressive. Fine then. Leave. Run away, because you cannot handle hearing the truth about yourself. David paused. He had been turning to walk away, but something in her words made him stop. For a second, it looked like he might respond with anger, but instead, he just shook his head slowly, a profound look of disappointment settling on his face. The truth, he said very quietly, so quietly that the entire studio had to strain to hear him, is that you invited me here as a guest in your home, so to speak, and you have treated me with nothing but contempt from the moment you decided to start this line of questioning. That says far more about you than it does about me. He turned and began walking toward the edge of the set. His steps were measured, dignified, not rushed or frantic, just the calm, steady walk of a man who had made his decision and was at peace with it. Ruth hurried after him, her heels clicking on the floor. "David, please wait," she called out, or her voice breaking slightly. "I am so sorry. This should never have happened. Please." David stopped and turned to face her. He reached out and gently touched her arm. "I appreciate that more than you know, Ruth. You have been nothing but kind and professional, but I need to leave now. I really do." Behind them, back at the panel, Denise was still standing. She looked at the camera and said, loudly enough for everyone to hear, "This is exactly what I am talking about. Men simply cannot handle being questioned about their privilege." Nadia whirled around to face her, and for the first time, real anger flashed across her face. "Denise, that is enough. More than enough. You have embarrassed us all. You have embarrassed the show." "Embarrassed?" Denise looked genuinely surprised by the accusation. "I spoke the truth. I asked the questions that needed to be asked." "You attacked a guest," Nadia said, her voice shaking with emotion. "A kind, talented guest who came here in good faith. That is not asking hard questions. That is being cruel and rude." David had reached the exit now. A crew member was holding the door open, looking mortified. David turned back one final time to look at the set, at the panel, at the confused and upset faces scattered throughout the audience, at the cameras that were capturing every second of this nightmare. "I wish you all the very best," he said. His voice carried across the silent studio, and then, with quiet dignity, he walked through the door and was gone. The studio erupted, not with applause, but with shocked murmuring. The audience started talking amongst themselves. Some were clearly upset, dabbing at their eyes. So others looked angry, shaking their heads. A few were on their feet, looking around as if unsure what to do. Ruth came back to the panel slowly. Her face was ashen. She looked at Denise, then at Nadia, then at the cameras. "We need to go to a break," she said, her voice tight and controlled. "Right now." "We are not going to a break," Denise protested. "We need to talk about what just happened. We need to discuss why he reacted that way." "Denise, we are going to a break," Ruth said with absolute firmness. She looked directly at someone off camera, probably the director. "Take us to break. Now, please." The screen cut abruptly to a commercial. But backstage, in the hallways and dressing rooms and control booths, chaos had fully taken hold. Producers rushed to David, who was already in his dressing room, each quickly collecting his things and putting them into a bag. His movements were efficient, practiced. He had done this thousands of times before, but never under these circumstances. "David, we are so incredibly sorry," one of the producers said, her voice frantic. "That should never, ever have happened. We had no idea she was going to do that." "I understand," David said calmly, not looking up from his packing. "These things happen, but I will not be coming back to finish the interview." "We completely understand," another producer said, wringing his hands. "We will make sure this is handled properly. We will make sure there are consequences." David paused and looked up at them. His expression was kind, despite everything. "I do not want anyone to get in trouble on my account. I just want to go home." Meanwhile, back on the set during the commercial break, a heated argument had erupted between the remaining hosts. "What on earth were you thinking?" Ruth demanded, whirling on Denise the moment the cameras were off. "That was completely, utterly out of line." "I was asking important questions," Denise said defensively, crossing her arms. "Questions that desperately need to be asked in this industry." "There is a time and a place for those questions," Nadia interjected, her voice still shaking. "And ambushing a guest on live television, a guest who came here to talk about his book, is absolutely not it." "I did not ambush anyone," Denise protested, her voice growing louder. I simply challenged him to think about his privilege. You did not challenge him, Ruth corrected sharply. You attacked him, repeatedly. You kept pushing and pushing, even when it was painfully clear that he was uncomfortable. That is not good journalism. That is not brave questioning. That is bullying, pure and simple. Denise actually bristled at that word. Bullying? You think I was bullying him? I was trying to hold him accountable for benefiting from a sexist system. Accountable for what exactly? Nadia asked, throwing her hands up. For being born male? For working hard and having a successful career? For being talented? None of those things are crimes, Denise. For benefiting from a system that has systematically excluded and marginalized women for decades, Denise said, her voice rising to match theirs. And I am not going to apologize for pointing that out. No one, Ruth said slowly and deliberately, is asking you to apologize for caring about women's issues or for wanting to have conversations about inequality. But the way you did it was wrong. You were aggressive. You were dismissive of his responses. You talked over him. You made our guest, a lovely man who has done nothing wrong, feel personally attacked for something he had no control over. A producer approached the panel nervously. Ladies, we are back from commercial in 30 seconds, he said quietly, looking between them with obvious concern. What do you want to do when we come back? Ruth took a deep breath, visibly trying to compose herself. We acknowledge what happened. We apologize sincerely to David and to our viewers, and then we move on to the next segment. I am not apologizing, Denise said flatly. Ruth turned to look at her with genuine disbelief. What did you just say? I said I am not apologizing, Denise repeated. I stand by every single word I said. Ruth stared at her for a long moment. Then she said, very quietly, but with absolute authority, then you need to leave the panel, right now. Excuse me? Denise looked genuinely shocked. You cannot be serious. I am completely serious, Ruth said. You heard me clearly. If you cannot acknowledge that what you did was inappropriate and wrong, if you cannot bring yourself to apologize for making a guest feel attacked, then you need to step away from this panel. This is my show too, and I absolutely will not let you turn it into a platform for personal vendettas. The producer looked between them nervously. 10 seconds until we are back on air, he warned. Denise stood up abruptly, her chair nearly tipping over. Fine. I will leave. But everyone watching needs to know that I stand by what I said. Every word of it. She yanked off her microphone and stormed off the set, just as the cameras came back on. Ruth and Nadia were left sitting there alone, looking completely shell-shocked. Ruth took a moment to compose herself, smoothing down her hair and straightening in her seat. Then she looked directly at the camera with as much professionalism as she could muster. Welcome back to Loose Women, she said, her voice remarkably steady despite the circumstances. As you saw before the break, our guest David Jason chose to leave the show. And I want to say, on behalf of everyone here, that we are deeply, profoundly sorry for what happened during that interview. Nadia nodded, her eyes visibly glistening. David is a wonderful, kind man and an absolute legend in this industry. He came here today to share his stories and talk about his book. He deserved so much better than what he received from us today. Ruth continued, her voice growing stronger. Our job as hosts of this show is to make our guests feel welcome and comfortable, to facilitate interesting, respectful conversations, to create a space where people can share their experiences, not to attack them, not to make them feel unwelcome. And today, we failed utterly at that basic responsibility. David, if you are watching this, we are truly, genuinely sorry. The audience, which had been sitting in tense silence, suddenly started to applaud. It was a slow clap at first, hesitant, but it quickly grew. More and more people joined in. Some started to stand up. Within seconds, most of the audience was on their feet, clapping loudly. It was absolutely clear where their sympathies lay. Backstage, in a quiet corner near the dressing rooms, Denise stood watching a monitor that showed the live broadcast. She saw Ruth and Nadia apologizing with obvious sincerity. She saw the audience standing and clapping in support of David. She saw the comments scrolling across the bottom of the screen from viewers at home, almost all of them expressing shock and sympathy for David. For the first time since the confrontation began, a flicker of doubt crossed her face, a slight hesitation, a crack in the absolute certainty she had displayed on set. But it was too late now. The damage had been done. The moment had passed. David Jason had already left the building. The interview was definitively over. And everyone who had witnessed it, whether in the studio or watching at home, knew they had just seen something extraordinary. Something that would be replayed and discussed and analyzed for years to come. What had started as a simple, friendly chat about a new book had somehow transformed into one of the most uncomfortable, painful moments in daytime talk show history. A beloved national treasure had been treated with open disrespect. A host had crossed every conceivable line of professional conduct, and millions upon millions of people had watched the entire thing unfold in real time, unable to look away. As the show finally cut to another commercial break, Ruth put her head in her hands. Nadia reached over and squeezed her shoulder gently. "What an absolute disaster," Ruth whispered, her voice muffled by her hands. "Complete and total disaster," Nadia agreed quietly, her own voice thick with emotion. And somewhere across London, David Jason sat in the back of a car heading toward his home, staring out the window at the passing city, shaking his head slowly at the bizarre turn his morning had taken. He had been in the entertainment business for more decades than most people had been alive. He had handled countless difficult interviews over the years. He had dealt with tough, probing questions from journalists. He had navigated tricky situations with grace, but nothing, absolutely nothing in his long and varied career had prepared him for what had just happened on that set. Nothing had prepared him for being personally attacked for his gender while trying to promote a book. Nothing had prepared him for being told that his life's work was somehow illegitimate. The whole catastrophic incident had lasted less than 15 minutes from start to finish. Just 15 short minutes. But they were 15 minutes that would define that episode forever. 15 minutes that would become a cautionary tale. 15 minutes that would be studied as a perfect example of how not to conduct a television interview. When you stripped away all the complicated politics and the heated rhetoric, it all came down to something very simple. Respect, or rather, the complete and utter lack of it. David had walked onto that set in good faith. He had come ready and willing to share his stories, to connect with the audience, to have a pleasant conversation, to promote his work. You see, he had approached the whole thing with kindness and openness. Instead, he had been blindsided with accusations. He had been treated as if his entire professional career was somehow tainted and illegitimate simply because of his gender, something he obviously had no control over whatsoever. And when he had tried, calmly and reasonably, to defend himself in his life's work, when he had tried to explain that he had indeed worked incredibly hard and faced many struggles, he had been mocked. His words had been dismissed out of hand. He had been accused of playing the victim when all he was doing was stating facts about his own experience. So, he had done the only thing a person with self-respect could do in that situation. He had stood up. He had calmly removed his microphone, and he had walked away with his dignity intact. It was such a powerful moment, a clear statement, a refusal to be treated poorly, regardless of the circumstances or the setting. And the studio audience had recognized it immediately. They had watched a genuinely kind, genuinely talented man be pushed far past his breaking point. They had watched him try repeatedly to stay calm, to be reasonable, to salvage an increasingly awful situation. And when none of that had worked, when it became clear that nothing he said would matter, they had watched him make the difficult choice to walk away with grace.